So in effect, as this peak goes up and down, we measure the key signature of your BLISS music. And as you'll see in a minute when we play the biofeedback game, we can play back in almost real time the musical key signature of your heart. And you hear your heart music. It's kind of fun. So the second thing we learn is the ability to move this up and down the scale, which is a measure of something called heart rate variability, which we'll talk about in a minute. So first thing is become coherent. Second thing is become emotionally flexible. The third thing we measure is empathy. When two peaks line up, which they've been doing very well here earlier. Very nice, guys. See, there we are. Yeah, okay, hello, hello. When the two peaks line up, what happens is their bodies have electrically coupled. So it's the physics of Tantra. It's the solution to marriage counseling in a certain way. It is a measurement of empathy. A scientist would call it impedance matching or resonance entrainment. But in effect, when two people's hearts enter the same key signature, which is a heart link, what happens is the capacitive information can move between bodies. And that is the physics of Tantra, quite literally. So the third thing we teach with this device is the ability to choose empathy by seeing who can find the other person's heart. I'm going to do a little bit of an adjust now here, since Zen's voltage coming from his heart is just a little bit lower than Julia, whose heart is singing so much. So I'm going to crank up the gain on the red channel a little bit, give Zen a better shot in the horse race here. There we go. Here we go. Okay, there he comes. Okay. Yeah. Now, those three things which I've just described to you, measured by this device, the HeartTuner. There's Zen. Beautiful place, too. Those things I've described, the ability to learn coherent emotion, the ability to learn range of emotion, the flexibility to change emotion, to not be stuck in one place, and the ability to link up with another heart, or many people's hearts, called empathy. Those three things are objectively measured by this device. In other words, that's objective, hard science, hard physics. There's nothing subjective or arguable about those measurements. We've measured coherence, we've measured change of key signature, and we've measured entrainment. The fourth thing that this device does is apparently teach the ability to move from head-centered to heart-centered emotion. And that measurement may be considered subjective because it's based on having done this with thousands of people. When the peak is right here at 1.0, this is the EI, or emotional index, which is the Y value, musical key signature of that peak. People usually report feeling intellectual satisfaction. When the peak is over here at 0.618, which is where Julia started and where they've gone back and forth to when they were feeling open. When the peak is right here, that's the golden mean ratio, 0.618. Hello. Okay. So when you're in your heart, it's there. And this peak here corresponds to the sacred geometry of the square root of the golden mean ratio and corresponds to people usually reporting feeling peaceful. Okay? So in fact, these three blue lines are the sacred geometry of golden mean ratio, square root of golden mean ratio, and 1. And those three are the generalized parking places for most people's EKG's musical key signature when they stabilize. So in fact, this is an introduction to sacred geometry right here. When Zen went to golden ratio here, we could ask Zen, were you thinking about feeling open as opposed to intellectual satisfaction? This is sometimes called the CEO position. Yeah, see Zen's up here. Zen actually moves back and forth very beautifully. Both of these folks are doing wonderfully here because you have range of emotion and you have the ability to entrain and you have coherence. So really, you guys, very good. This is the spiritual country here. We see this ability to ascend here, which is the number of harmonics included, ascends. So just to finish the description of the screen here, here we describe the millisecond interval between heart harmonics called the beat intervals. And in this case, we're measuring Julia. And this would be the wave that corresponds to Julia's breathing. Little noise event here. And by spectrum analyzing the low frequencies of the heart, we get the heart rate variability. So among other things, we can learn the skill to entrain your breath with your heart. This display of the heart rate variability is about the only thing the HeartMath device displays. We display this plus the coherence display. Yeah? So we believe this is the first time coherence has ever been measured. The heart rate variability time history waterfall here is very much discussed in the medical literature, and we cover this in detail in the weekend course. But to oversimplify, when this cascade is harmonically inclusive, then in fact harmonic richness means you have become fractal and able to invite lots of different frequencies in your body, which corresponds to a predictor for health. When this peak here is at 0.2, it means the primary frequency of her breath is at 5 cycles per second. 5-second cycle for the breath. So you can learn about entraining your breath with your heart using the device. Yeah? Does anybody have any basic questions about how the HeartTuner works or what it is? Yeah? A simple definition of coherence. Yes, thank you. That's the right question. When the soldiers are marching across the bridge, if all the soldiers come into the same step, the bridge begins to vibrate because the soldiers are going over in phase. So they're stepping in time. Well, that columnation or in-phase-ness of a wave, such that the marching becomes efficient because the waves are all aligned, is the difference between a flashlight and a laser. And that ability to become coherent literally means that all the soldiers have learned to share space elegantly. And that's exactly what the heart learns when this peak goes up. The thing that's new here is we never were able before to measure the internal coherence of such an oscillator. So the other things that this device is used for, where we enter one channel, we put these electrodes on your brain, and we set the high gain here. This is switchable to high gain. We can also switch the heart rate variability between channels. So this device can display a brain and a heart and compare the coherence of your heart with your brain. And we can also put this, as you'll see in a minute in the fusion implosion PowerPoint animated slideshow, that we're able to measure life force with this device. But what I'd like to do now is introduce the significance of this sacred geometry, which appears to relate to compassion. That in fact, when our volunteers here come to this golden mean ratio, look at that. Very responsive, Sam. That was very nice. So the actual activity of what you do is, for example, we had some friends here on the other night who were looking at this, and they were asking themselves why they were addicted to smoking. And every time they would ask themselves a question which got close to an emotional issue, the heart would fire up. So you could immediately use it as a diagnostic tool to see when you're getting close to the truth behind the emotional issue at hand. So in fact, the heart is literally a lie detector in this sense, that it doesn't fire up unless you're speaking your truth. So in effect, coherence is a measure of pure intention, because it's a measure, literally in physics, of how a wave becomes shareable. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to show you very gently what this ability to cohere the vacuum might mean in terms of the ability to produce fusion. So that, for example, before, when Zen went right here at golden ratio, he creates a musical frequency signature in the heart which permits collapse, permits fusion, permits the making of centering force. So you're about to see a little summary of some evidence which leads us to believe that the ability to cohere the vacuum is directly related to the ability to become emotionally coherent. So this is an introduction to some of the visuals we'll be using on the weekend. Essentially what we want to do is teach the physics of implosion and learn about how that applies to what we just saw in the heart, the ability of the heart to make that centering force. And I think we're going to begin this conversation by talking about the ether or zero-point background energy. Actually, Martin Selecki was kind enough to bring this vortex generator here this evening. But it turns out we had some logistical difficulties and we couldn't show you this lovely